I feel very honored to be allowed to introduce Orlando Mistretta, who we have tried for a long time to get on our program, so you're very lucky. Orlando has lived his entire life in the shadows of the San Gabriels. As a graduate student at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, he discovered a manuscript by Joseph Ewan in the garden's archives that first sparked his interest in the plants of the exceedingly rugged mountain range located in close proximity to greater Los Angeles, the San Gabriel Mountains. For the past 4 decades, his botanical career has taken him all over the San Gabriel Mountains, including the most remote corners and in all seasons. The result is this field guide that is at once a personal and entertaining account of the region's botanical context and history of exploration, and a long-awaited inventory of its flora. And we are so glad there is an inventory of its flora now. So thank you so much for coming to speak to us, Orlando, and I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Orchid, and thank you, Cliff, and thank you, Rebecca, for getting me to this point, because I'm not a Zoom person, so this is a new thing. It's nice to be here. And I want to thank everybody for zooming in this evening and for giving me this opportunity to share some information about the San Gabriel Mountains and its flora, a range and subject many of you know well. I have often thought to myself that images of the San Gabriel Mountains are recognized by more people than almost any mountain range in the world. Just think about the Tournament of Roses parade or the Rose Bowl and the huge national and even global audiences those events attract. All those TV cameras scanning to the north inescapably capture the steep escarpments and high ridge lines of this range above all those busy humans. The Los Angeles region itself is one of the world's great population centers. And though these mountains may not be shrouded in mystery, they are a source of unending new discoveries. Tonight, I would like to take a moment first to orient ourselves and define the boundaries as I have interpreted them, then take a little journey around the mountains, reviewing habitats and places and a small sample of the rare and unusual species that are known from them, and then offer some general information about the flora, its size, its diversity, relative abundance of species, comparisons of coast-facing and desert-facing slopes, take a look at a few examples where gene flow between species complicates determination, and contrast that measured, often imperceptible evolutionary march of time with dramatic and near instant changes wrought by catastrophic events such as fires and floods. Lastly, some thoughts about abundance and rarity and native versus non-native as we continue to our efforts to further understand the flora of this prominent Southern California wildland. This view of the mountains is from near the mouth of San Antonio Canyon, north of Claremont, one of the few remaining places where native vegetation spills out of the mountains and across the alluvial fans at its base, and captures a view of the highest peaks at the eastern end of the range from left to right, San Antonio Peak, Ontario Peak, and Cucamonga Peak. So we can start our journey here. Go to the next slide. As with most floras, these boundaries are somewhat arbitrary. I have taken a combination of natural borders as well as prominent human imprints on the land, primarily major highways, features that will probably persist for many generations. As mentioned, these mountains form the scenic backdrop for the lives of millions of people who inhabit the coastal valleys and plains between the mountains and the Pacific Ocean. These millions have made the job of defining the southern boundary relatively simple. With few exceptions, one just needs to follow the northern edge of development, and there the flora begins. So I'll walk you around this mountain range very quickly and show you some of the prominent features and why and how these boundaries were defined. We follow from west from Claremont, where we started. We can see we are following pretty closely, adhering to that wildland development interface. We cross the San Gabriel River at about the 200-meter elevation point and continue west all the way to the injunction of Interstate Highway 210 and California Highway 14, which roughly parallels the Santa Clara River. We follow Highway 14 to its junction with Soledad Canyon, and then northeast along the south side of Soledad Canyon near its origin at the train depot of Vincent, now a large Southern California Edison substation. From there, it continues northeast to the California Aqueduct at Barrel Springs, the northernmost point of the Flora. Continuing to the southeast to the mouth of Little Rock Creek, and then on to the mouth of Big Rock Creek, which are here and here. At the north base of Holcomb Ridge and across Bob's Gap. From there, the boundary continues across the northern slopes at approximately the 1,300-meter elevation contour all the way to Interstate 15 at Cajon Summit. Then along the west side of Cajon Canyon to its mouth. So we're over here, there. From there, west again along the edge of the development to our starting point above Claremont. From
Orlando?
Yes.
Excuse me, I don't see your pointer.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a pointer. Is that a pointer? I don't know how that works. Oh, I see what, I'm never mind. I'm good, thank you.
Okay, now I see it.
I'm sorry, yeah, that's how, so we're here now in the Cajon Canyon and we come across the west back to our starting point at Claremont, somewhere around here. So from east to west, the mountains are roughly 65 miles long, 26 miles wide north to south at their widest point. In total area, they occupy about 500,000 acres or 780 square miles. One of the defining features of this range is topography. Elevations range from just under 200 meters near the mouth of the San Gabriel River Canyon to just over 3,000 meters on the summit of Mount San Antonio, and the gains in elevation can be dramatic. For example, from the mouth of Cucamonga Canyon here to the summit of Cucamonga Peak, the elevation changes nearly 2,100 meters in about 4.5 miles. One visual that captures that rise might be this photo from the Grand Canyon, depicting the dramatic elevation gain from the river's edge to Grandview Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. But one would have to continue half that distance again at the same angle of ascent to finally reach the summit of Cucamonga Peak. These steep escarpments are common along the south-facing slopes, while the north-facing slopes are generally more gradual. The eastern portions of the range contain the highest peaks, with elevations gradually diminishing to the west. Now let's go around the mountains again and sample some habitats and look at some plants. Before tectonic forces produced the range we know today, there was an older mountain range that has mostly eroded away. It survives at the base of the current range in places like the foothills above Glendora, Upland, Laverne, and Claremont. These remnants of the old San Gabriel Mountains are characterized by relatively heavy, deep soils. Taps are rare in the San Gabriels, such as the many-stemmed Dudleya, Dudleya multicaulis, and the thread-leaved Brodea, Brodea filifolia, are known only from these localities. The only known locations for the golden rayed Pentaketa, Pentaketa aurea, subspecies aurea, and California fillery, California macrophylla are also here. The San Gabriel River is the mother of all drainages as far as these mountains are concerned. It has an east fork, a west fork, and a north or middle fork, and bisects much of the front range, both east and west and north and south. Among the many plants we could mention from this river drainage are two endemic species. The San Gabriel Mountains Dudleya, Dudleya densiflora, is found on the steep exposed rock outcrops at the mouth of the San Gabriel River Canyon and just to the west in Fish and Roberts Canyon. The other Dudleya endemic to our range, this subspecies of the canyon Dudleya, Dudleya cymosa subspecies crebrifolia, is also confined to Fish and Roberts Canyons. I don't know how to get these things off that screen. So the slenderhorn spineflower Dodecahema leptoceras is known from this area by a single collection in the West Fork made in 1921. The hot springs Firmicilus termalis, likewise is known from a single collection from the North Fork made in the early 20th century. Continuing west, the drainages of Monrovia Canyon, Santa Anita Canyon, and Eaton Canyon, somewhere in here, harbor the most mesic low elevation vegetation. This is one of the few Southern California locations for Pacific madrone, Arbutus menziesii, and one of the few Southern California locations for the Sonoran maidenhair fern, Philipterus puberula variety sonorensis. The endemic San Gabriel bedstraw, Galium grande, finds its home in the understory of this mixed evergreen forest of this region. Engelmann oak, Quercus engelmannii, is one component of this evergreen broadleaf forest and is confined to this area of the mountains. And in more exposed locations, Broughton's rattleweed, Astragalus brontonii, has been documented. A lot of this area has, of course, been recently burned, and it's going to all look different now. There's been some dramatic changes to the flora, and it'll be very interesting to see what that looks like when we get a chance to get in there. The Big Tunga Canyon drainage is the second largest drainage in the mountains, cutting south, then west, then south again across the Front Range. Davidson's bush mallow, Mallocamus davidsonii, occurs here as a component of the chaparral vegetation. Greatest aster, Symphyotrichum gratae, occurs in wet areas along the drainages. Placerita Canyon drains almost directly west to the western boundary of the range and is the only place where Quercus lobata, the valley oak, is known to occur. Pearson's morning glory, Calistegia pearsonii, also touches into the range from the northeast. As we continue to the northeast, at around the confluence of Sand Canyon and Soledad Canyon, the plant species common to the coastal slopes steadily give way to vegetation more closely aligned with the Mojave Desert. Thistle sage, Salvia cardoacea, is one example. Its only appearance within the flora boundaries occurs in Soledad Canyon. Mount Gleason, above the community of Acton, just under 2,000 meters, is the highest peak in the western portion of the range, and is the type locality for the Mount Gleason paintbrush. This is a view looking east or looking west south toward the ocean. This is the Mount Gleason paintbrush, Cattleya gleasonii. The Angeles Forest Highway crosses the divide between the coastal and desert sides of the range at Mill Creek Summit, which is here, and is the type locality for the San Gabriel manzanita, Arctostaphylos glandulosa, subspecies gabrielensis. Kentucky Springs, west of Vincent, is the only place where desert 4 o'clock, Mirabilis multiflora variety pubescens, is known, one of the rare occurrences of Adobe Yampa, Peridioidia pringli, and the only documented locality for beaked weed milkfinch, Astragalus acutirostris. Continuing east, we reach the Little Rock Creek drainage, which is here. Marsilia vestita, the hairy water clover, has recently been documented from this reservoir near the mouth of the canyon. Farther upslope in Santiago Canyon is the only known location for the California Androsaceae elongated subspecies acuta. And in the Carr Canyon tributary along the desert edge, which is here, 2 species of one associates with the Mojave Desert, the desert candle, Calanthus inflatus, and the desert Indian paintbrush, Cattleya cremosa, have been collected. Big Rock Creek Canyon, just to the east, is the type locality for the Rock Creek broom rape, Orobanche ballida, subspecies ballida, and the only known location for brewer's mustang mint, Monodilla breweri, subspecies breweri. Between Big Rock Creek and Little Rock Creek, there was a series of uplifted sandstone outcrops. They form the formation known as the Devil's Punch Bowl. And the single locality where scarlet milkfinch, Astragalus coccineus, has been documented. Upslope and continuing east from Rock Creek, Big Pines marks the western end of the Swarthout Valley, which is here, and is probably the closest thing to what one might call a montane meadow. Unfortunately, it is bisected by a road junction and partially covered by a parking lot to accommodate the mountain high ski area. California cranesbill, Geranium californicum, is one species known only from this remnant meadow. Directly above and north of Big Pines is Table Mountain, composed mostly of limestone substrates, which are rare in the San Gabriels. Spreading phlox, Phlox diffusa, is known from here and nowhere else in the range. The community of Wrightwood, the largest community in the range, occupies the lower end of Swarthmore Valley. The endemic species, San Antonio milkvetch, Astragalus lentiginosus, variety Antonius, is known only from this locality. Just beyond Wrightwood to the east, we again cross from the desert to the coastal side of the mountains in the Cajon Canyon drainage, part of the Santa Ana River system. Rare plants known from this locality include white bracted spine flower Coryzanthe, Xanthe variety Leucotheca, the short trioid beaver tail, Opuntia basilaris variety Brachyclada, and the endemic rock Monardella, Monardella saxicola. A second uplifted sandstone formation, familiar to fans of old Western movies, known as Mormon Rocks, occurs in the Cajon Canyon area. A major geologic feature of the range, and in fact of North America, is the San Andreas Fault, which slices across the northeast corner of the mountains and is clearly visible from above through Lone Pine Canyon, Swarthmore Valley, and on to the north, and is responsible for 3 ponded wetlands along its route. Lone Pine Canyon, or Lost Lake and Lone Pine Canyon, one of 2 historical locations for Natal's sunflower, Helianthus natalii, variety natalii, Jackson Lake, west of Big Pines, and Caldwell Lake, one of the few locations where desert saltgrass, Disticus spicata, is known to occur. Finally, swinging west across the Front Range, Day Creek, Cucamonga Creek, and San Antonio, Cucamonga, and Day Creek drain the south slopes of the highest peaks in the range. The white Brodea, Tritalia hyacinthina, is known from a single collection in a San Antonio Creek drainage made in 1919. The short sepaled bitterroot, Lewisia brachycalyx, is represented by a single collection made in 1915. Muhlenbergia californica, one of the rare native grasses, is shown here in typical habitat from wet springs and seeps. A narrow-leaved bedstraw, Galen angustifolium, subspecies gabrielensis, is an endemic bedstraw known from this region of the range. So let's talk a little bit about vegetation types. Given the wide range in elevations, the highly varied and confusing geology, slopes with both coastal and desert aspects, and the distance east to west across the mountains, it is not surprising that a large number of vegetation types would be represented in the San Gabriel Mountains, even if most of them are often fragmented in their distributions and limited in their extent. The notable exception being that category of shrublands I have listed here as hard chaparral. Composed of woody shrubs represented by various California lilac species, manzanitas, scrub oaks, flannelbush, toyon, silk tassel, mountain mahogany, and chamise, to name a few of the major players, either in mixed populations or dominated by any one of these species, depending on location and successional stage. I'll just show a few examples of some of these vegetation types, beginning at the top, looking at the summit of Mount San Antonio, which doesn't quite rise above tree line, as evidenced by the branch of lodgepole pine coming in from the left. Alpine sulfur flower buckwheat, Eriogonum umbulatum, variety minus, one of the many buckwheat species, is found on the exposed slopes at these highest elevations. Another rare buckwheat, Eriogonum microthecum, variety johnstonii, occurs here as well. Below the highest summits is a small band of lodgepole pines forming a woodland along with white fir and Jeffrey pine. Bush chinkapin is the understory shrub in this slide. A few groves of foxtail pine, Pinus flexilis, also occupy this zone on Mount Baden-Powell and adjacent peaks. And at the end of the size scale, Pearson's Spring Beauty, Claytonia lanceolated, variety Pearsonii, and the endemic Abrams alum root, Heuchera abramsia, occur in the understory. Below the lodgepole pines, a mixed conifer woodland of ponderosa pine, Jeffrey pine, sugar pine, incense cedar, and big cone Douglas fir, is best developed on the mid-elevation slopes on the desert side of the mountains. This picture from Cooper Canyon in the Upper Little Rock Creek drainage. The great southern mountain Monardella australis subspecies cinerea is one of the rare Monardellas found in this plant community. Here's some of that chaparral vegetation we talked about, which occupies a wide range in altitudes from near the base of the mountains to fairly high elevations and is most extensive on the coast-facing slopes. This picture is from Cattle Canyon, part of the San Gabriel River drainage. A well-developed pinyon juniper woodland extends across the lower elevations of the desert slopes, along with some limited Joshua tree woodland and desert sage scrub. On the opposite side of the mountains, coastal sage scrub occupies some of the lowest elevations. This vegetation type, once abundant in the adjacent valleys, now occurs in disjunct relictual stands across the Front Range. Riparian habitat slices through all the various vegetation types in the deeply cut canyons and throughout the range. And here and there, a pocket of wetlands such as this marshy area known as Big Cienega above Crystal Lake, home to one of our shoria species, the lemon lily, Lilium perrii. Or this sloping wetland in one of the areas referred to as snowmelt gullies on the shaded north-facing slopes where snow has been known to linger for almost the entire season in a good year. Wouldn't that be great? And is one habitat where the endemic Ewan cinquefoil, Drymocalis cuneifolia subspecies Ewania, can be found. John Muir, that great naturalist and champion of conservation, famously described the Sierra Nevada range as a gentle wilderness. He framed the wilderness attributes of the San Gabriel Mountains in a somewhat different tone. This range overlooks the Los Angeles vineyards and orange groves from the north and is more rigidly accessible in the ordinary sense of the word than any I have ever attempted to penetrate. The slopes are exceptionally steep and insecure to the foot, and they are covered with thorny bushes from 5 to 10 feet high. With the exception of little spots not visible in general views, the entire surface is covered with them, sweeping gracefully down into every gorge and hollow and swelling over every ridge and summit in shaggy, ungovernable exuberance. Doesn't that sound like a fun field adventure? Only John Muir could paint it that way. With a poetic economy of words, Tim Ross was able to express his own opinion of the rigors of the field when he renamed the Moody Canyon drainage the toilet bowl of death. And with that, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge those who have wandered into the mountains to retrieve the specimens that have informed our current understanding of the flora of this rugged range. The collectors shown here are taken from a list compiled by Dick Swinney and Andy Sanders in their comprehensive online reference, Plants of the San Gabriel Mountains. As you can see, Dick Swinney himself is responsible for more collections than the next top 6 collectors combined. He has collected systematically from throughout the range, brought in collections from many areas that were previously unrepresented or underrepresented, adding records of new taxa and new localities of known taxa all along the way. In addition to the names listed here, another 100 or so could be easily added of individuals who have on their own or in the company of others procured plant specimens for the permanent record. For while this range is rugged, it is not remote and has inspired many to journey into the mountains on voyages of discovery, making this a well-documented region in many areas despite the difficulties. And now for a look at what these collections have revealed. Approximately 1,588 taxa of vascular plant species have been recorded from the range. 335 of those are exotic taxa, representing about 22% of the total. The largest family is the Asteraceae with 210 species, followed by the Poaceae with 147 species. The largest genus is the genus Eriogonum with 35 taxa, followed by the genus Carex with 23 taxa. What's common and what's rare? I have divided up the species into 4 categories. These are somewhat subjective rather than strictly defined by any hard and fast criteria, are mostly determined by the collection history, and to me represent more an indication of the likelihood of encountering a particular taxon on a random trip into the range. Plants can, of course, be restricted in range, but common or even abundant where they do occur. That said, we have the results displayed. 138 taxa are common, representing 9% of the total, and so forth. As you can see, one half of the plants fall into the last category, and the last two categories taken together, uncommon and rare plants, account for almost 70% of the total. Approximately 152 species are known from a single locality, about 10% of the total. When I began this publication, the material for this publication, there were 13 taxa considered endemic to the range. There were still 13 taxa when I was done, but not the same 13. With a recent discovery of Pearson's lupin, Lupinus pearsonii, in the Tehachapi Mountains, it had to be taken from the endemic list, but a taxon recently described, Monodella australis, subspecies Gabrielens, has been added. I present them in this way to highlight the fluid nature of these lists and of our ever-changing understanding of the flora in general. Here is the recently demoted Pearson's lupin from the slopes of Mount Baden-Powell, previously its only known location. Botanists and others have long recognized the difference in the vegetation on the coast side of the transverse ranges in comparison to the desert side of these ranges. The blue line in this slide represents that divide in the San Gabriel Mountains between the coastal or cismontane slopes and the desert or transmontane slopes. When we compare species distributions in the range in terms of transmontane versus cismontane slopes, we get the following results. Of the total species, 590 or 38% are known only from the coastal slopes. 167 or 11% are known only from the desert slopes, and slightly less than half the total are common to both sides of the divide. So there is a significant difference in the flora depending on which side of the mountains you are on. By a conservative estimate, there are at least 150 species where the variations in morphology that complicate determination can be attributed to some level of gene exchange between recognized taxa. I have classified them as shown here and would just like to give an example or two of each to illustrate the point. For some taxa, hybrids are found occasionally and don't seem to conform to any discernible pattern. This seems to be the case for Berkelia nivinii and Berkelia californica. And these California lilac species, Ceanothus crassifolius and Ceanothus fastidius. For others, there appears to be some integration only along range boundaries of closely related taxa. This is true for these varieties of slender buckwheat, Eriogonum grassley, variety grassley, which is known from across the coastal slopes, and Eriogonum grassley, variety incultum, confined to the Cone Canyon drainage where intermediates between the species are found. Likewise, riverside spine flower Coryzanthe xanthe, variety leucotheca, is known from scattered locations on both sides of Coryzanthe variety xanthe is known from scattered locations on both sides of the desert and coastal slopes. The white bracted spine flower Coryzanthe xanthe variety leucotheca is known only from the Cajon Canyon drainages and Lytle Creek drainages, and it is from these here that apparent integration between the taxa occurs. For others, it is possible to make determinations of each taxon separately throughout its range, but intermediates are also common along with both parental forms, as with these two varieties of Yerba Santa, Eridictor crassifolium, and these two varieties of baby blue eyes, Nemophila menziesii. And then there are those instances where determination to one taxon or the other never seems to be possible. I'm just teasing with this slide of these two sandwort varieties. They are the exact same picture, but I could never say with confidence which variety was which with any of the specimens I examined, although both are recorded from the range. Contrasting with the slow and barely perceptible changes in the flora indicated by the flow of genes over evolutionary time, are near instant, if often temporary changes wrought by catastrophic forces transforming the landscape. With prolonged dry periods, steep slopes, dense vegetation, periods of intense heat and intense winds, fires are a big part of the story of the San Gabriel Mountain flora. This slide provides a record of the fire history over just the last 15 years. In 2009, one fire alone, the station fire, burned over 161,000 acres, or nearly 252 square miles. It was the largest fire in the recorded history of Los Angeles County and was inescapable drama for millions of residents in the valleys below. Many of you may remember. When it was over, nearly 1/3 of the total mountain range was an incinerated wasteland, stripped of almost every shred of vegetation. In the summer of 2009, it looked like this. In the following spring, after a winter of just adequate precipitation, it looked like this. 160,000 acres of barren waste that had become a nearly uninterrupted garden of wildflowers. A great deal of what had burned in the station fire had been primarily closed canopy chaparral vegetation of mixed woody shrubs. From their ashes sprang forth this hidden flora of mostly native annuals with displays to rival any of the great wildflower shows one associates with the Mojave or Colorado deserts in a good year. Often they occurred in mixed associations and sometimes dominated by one or two species. Distant Phacelia distans in this photo, short lobe Phacelia brachioloba in this one, Saltogilia grenellii, yellow monkey flower, Diplicus brevipies, pine gilia leptantha subspecies transversa, the endemic San Gabriel Lananthus concinus, even the beautiful and elusive plumber's mariposa lily, Calicornis plumeri. Beautiful for sure, but not always so elusive. Calicornis plumeri is often considered a taxon of conservation concern, but when conditions are right, it can be abundant. It is not that geographically restricted in its distribution, occurring across the coastal slopes from the west side to the east. In the spring of 2010, I estimated the population in the burned area of the West Fork of the San Gabriel River alone to be in the thousands. The vast majority of these would be either dormant or hidden by the dense woody canopy of chaparral blanketing these slopes in their unburned state. Finally, I'd like to do one quick pivot to the interesting conservation story of Nevin's barberry, a story some of you may know. Berberis nevinii is an endangered species. It is known from one location on public land in the Angeles National Forest in San Francisco Canyon. In its proactive approach to management of sensitive biological resources, the Forest Service set out in the late 1980s to develop a management plan for this single population on U.S. Forest Service land. To that end, a management guide was produced through a cooperative agreement between the Angeles National Forest and the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, outlining the current state of knowledge regarding the species and a program for its long-term management. Here is a picture of one specimen in its natural habitat in San Francisco Canyon. Or is it? Conditions at the site suggested that this may not be a naturally occurring population. These suspicions were fueled by the fact that several other native species were present that were otherwise unknown from the vicinity. These included Pinus sibeniana, called here its foothill pine, Acelus california, the California buckeye, and Prosopis mesquite, which is certainly not in our area. It was also known that this was a popular landscape item for those few native plant enthusiasts who were around in the early part of the 20th century. Several years later, there appeared the smoking gun, if you will, in the form of this correspondence to Howard McMinn in regards to an entry in his Manual of Southern California Shrubs. Confirming that the progenitors of this population were indeed planted at the site by none other than the pioneering horticulturist Theodore Payne, as part of an attempt to revegetate the canyon after the famous collapse of the San Francisco Dam. The letter also includes this brief eyewitness account of the disappearance of the plant from its limited natural range in the San Fernando Valley. We used to find Berberis nevinii along the eastern edge of the San Fernando Valley from Burbank to the Pacoima Wash. On account of the development in this section, all the plants are now gone, except in the Pacoima Wash. This seems to be the last stand here. I never saw but one plant in the Arroyo Seco above Pasadena. So for all extents and purposes, it had been totally extirpated from this part of the world as far as we knew. Flash forward 6 decades to the discovery of this plant, Berberis nivinnii, in Cobalt Canyon above Claremont. A natural occurrence? Here is a species happily growing at the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. I guess I should be calling it the California Botanic Garden, where specimens have been cultivated for many decades, complete with these showy flowers and beautiful fruits known to be favorite of several bird species. And here's the distance between the plants at the Botanic Garden and the Cobalt Canyon locality just within the Flora boundary, about 2 miles as the seed dispersal agent flies. Clearly difficult to rule out the possibility that the plants in the foothills are waif introductions from cultivated material or even deliberately planted from specimens purchased at the Botanic Garden plant sales. As the current drought has promoted the long overdue transformation of the suburban landscapes to more climate appropriate plants, including many native species, we can expect more native plants to make their way into the native landscape. The baseline of data represented by all the collections to date will help us to identify these as new arrivals to the flora rather than odd range extensions of naturally occurring taxa, distinguishing the natives from the natives, if you will. I'm not sure if there's ever been a resolution to this issue. I know there were folks at the garden working on it. I don't know, doing genetic analysis. I'm not sure what they've come up with. In summary, the late eminent professor of botany, Dr. Robert Thorne, and his wife May arrived in Claremont in the early 1960s. Dr. Thorne quickly set his sights on the botanical wealth he observed outside the Rancho Santa Ana herbarium each day. Often with colleagues visiting researchers or students in tow, he made many excursions to the mountains, collected thousands of specimens, and set about to categorize with the tools of the day the diversity of the flora. File cards to the ready, he painstakingly added plants and localities in his efforts to compile a flora of the San Gabriel Mountains. Decades later, the process continues with tools he could not have imagined. Data representing the botanical collections of herbaria from around the state and beyond are now available with the click of a mouse. When Joseph Ewan, another pioneer of California botany, began the work of compiling his flora in 1932, he made this interesting comment in his introduction. It was felt that the necessary data was available, and it was not so much the need of additional information as the necessity of bringing together, correlating, and interpreting the widely scattered knowledge of the San Gabriel flora recorded or at hand. From his time to now, tens of thousands of additional specimens from throughout the mountains have been added to the list of collections known from this range. The necessary data are a great deal more robust today than those available to Joseph Ewan in 1932. It is often said that a flora is never complete. This published today can be out of date even before the ink is dry. New taxa will come to light even as those areas where botanical exploration have occurred in the past. There is never an end to this endeavor. The best we can do, even with the power of the internet and the ever more sophisticated databases and analytical tools, is, in the words of Joe Ewan, to continue the task of bringing together, correlating, and interpreting the widely scattered knowledge of the flora recorded or at hand. I would like to thank and acknowledge all the folks who were generous in sharing their great photographs in various plants and places for this presentation. And finally, after viewing many of the rarest plants in the flora, I offer my candidate for the most common and coincidentally one of the most dramatic species in the range. Hesperia yucca whipplei, variously known as chaparral yucca, Spanish bayonet, or Lord's candle, can be found from the farthest points in the western part of the mountains to the farthest points in the east, from the very lowest elevations to near the very highest elevations on both the coastal slopes and the desert slopes, and in every plant community. So if a mountain range needs a mascot, I think this would be my choice. And that's my presentation, so thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Orlando. That was very interesting, and I enjoyed all the photos. They make me want to get back out into locations I haven't been to in several years. So now we can have some questions for Orlando. I guess Rebecca, do you have some questions queued up for him?
Yeah. I think the easiest one to start with, Chris Wagner asked, are your flora numbers that you were, I think you had about halfway through the presentation, are those based on herbarium specimens?
The numbers of species?
Yeah, I think that was what he was asking.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, those are all herbarium based. That was what came up. What I came up with when the floor was finished. It was 1,588 taxa, I think. I decided. So it's kind of like close. I mean, one person that I recognize some taxons, some people don't. There's probably things, I'm sure there's things you missed. So somewhere in there.
Great. The next one was Gwendolyn Henry asked if you can touch on the recovery of the area from the fire in the Devil's Punch Bowl.
You know, the fires that I was most familiar with was the station fire, which was that large fire. We had a chance to survey the area before and after the burn, and it was a different world going in there before and going after the burn. Recovery is very fast in a lot of these places. Chaparral vegetation especially recovers very quickly. A lot of the species stump sprout. So by the second or third season, the chaparral is really beginning to close in again. And by about the fifth or sixth season, you have a hard time telling that there was a major burn over a lot of that landscape. When we lose forests, when we lose trees, those are much slower to come back. Those may not come back at all. They may need help. And we didn't lose a lot of forest in a lot of these fires, but because there isn't a lot of forest out there, really a lot of kind of a closed stand forest. Mount Gleason has conifer woodland on it. Some of the north slopes do, but those are a slower recovery period. But a lot of the chaparral comes back pretty quickly.
Great. Now, another very specific question we got during the presentation, the person who asked the question signed off, but since we're recording it, they might get it later. They asked if you could give any help with differentiating a very specific varietal, and I always unsure with my Latin pronunciation, but Acmispon americanus, variety americanus, from other species.
You know, the best way to do that is to kind of go ahead and work it through the keys and look at characters. I know that's kind of a punt, but I don't think I can really give you much in the way of specifics besides what are in sort of the manuals that sort of help differentiate that taxon from other ones. So.
And then C. Welch asked, are you concerned about non-local genetics being introduced to the area by garden varieties of native plants?
Well, you know, one of the reasons I brought up that whole story about Nevins and barberry is because I know a lot of people do have that concern. And people that study plant geography, for example, plant distributions, when you throw something like that out there, it kind of gives them all kinds of fits because they don't know where that came from. So, and then they try to interpret that in terms of the larger story of plant distributions, when it doesn't really have to be interpreted that way because it came in from a different source. It's not a naturally occurring thing that way. There's going to be, I think efforts to identify local source material are really advanced now compared to what they were maybe 15 or 20 years ago. I think mostly when they try to revegetate sites, they use native seed from the site to do it with. We're going to have instances of native vegetation being affected by, you know, things that come in from other places. Same species that are propagated elsewhere end up in the landscape. They're going to begin to do a little gene exchange. It's going to mix it up a little bit. Yeah, we're going to keep changing things, and it's inevitable that that'll happen. So we are humans. That's what we do. We kind of make a mess of things. But how it goes.
A follow-up to the earlier question about where your numbers came from. They were asking if the flora herbarium samples were just from the California Botanic Garden only, or from many herbariums.
Most of the work I did was at the California Botanic Garden, the herbarium there, and most of this, there's been a lot of collection history in the San Gabriels that got deposited at that garden ultimately. And a lot of people that collected usually collect duplicates, and often a duplicate arrives at our garden. So I'm hoping that I was able to capture most of the species and a lot of the variation and a lot of the localities by the material I had at hand at the Botanic Garden. It was hard for me to use the larger databases of information without specifically examining the plants myself. So I couldn't really anticipate, I couldn't know, couldn't use a lot of the material at other gardens unless there was actually duplicates that had come to us. And it turns out that that was the case most of the time. So I felt pretty good that I had caught most of what was out there.
Great. Apparently a lot of folks want to know about identifying subspecies. So Gwendolyn Henry asked, you know, if you're stuck on identifying a subspecies, are DNA tests done to differentiate some of the more similar subspecies?
Say something about DNA, did you say, Rebecca?
Yeah, she's asking if DNA tests are done for differentiating some of the subspecies that are very difficult to tease apart.
You know, it's the subspecies are difficult to tease apart because they're genetically similar to other subspecies, and there's a lot of sort of mixing going on. So folks that do the DNA analysis, they can help clarify the situation sometimes, and sometimes it gets more confusing. The deeper you go into the weeds, the more you realize that, you know, there's a lot going on. We think we have, you know, discrete items that we call them taxa, we call them species, and we call them subspecies. We're just catching a point in time here, really. Things keep moving, you know, nothing stays the same. So one of the reasons it's so hard to identify plants sometimes is because that's going on. And we have these hybrids, and we have integration, and we have incipient speciation. All those things are happening in the landscape as we're looking at it. So we're trying to make sense of it. That's what, you know, taxonomists do, but it's never clean. It's always a little messy. So
great. And a whole bunch of folks are asking where they can get your book. So I'm going to put that link in the chat for everyone.
thank you. I was supposed to do that as well, but I didn't know how to do that. So
but it's available for sale through the California Botanic Gardens website, everybody. So please look in the chat for that link. And then one more question. Where was the population of Arbutus menzii that you reported in the West San Gabriels? And were these trees affected by recent fires?
The trees that I found and other people have found, I was at the top of the Monrovia Canyon drainage when I came across populations of Arbutus menzii. I think there are also adjacent populations in maybe the top of Eaton Canyon. I'm not sure, but yeah, that area was incredible for its forests. The mixed evergreen forests in those canyons were remarkable, and they hadn't burned for a long time since when I saw them last. So I was anticipating that when they burned, it was going to be dramatic, and I believe it was dramatic. And I'm sure populations of Arbutus menzii were affected. How badly and how well they'll come back, well, that's what we'll have to find out now.
Well, thank you so much, Orlando. You seem to have worked through all the questions that we got.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and I really appreciate being able to do this. So,
well, it's been lovely to have you.
Thank you.